Talking Ohio State football, we got Tony Gerdeman on the line. No more phone calls. Sorry. The phone line is down. We're talking with Tony here. Hey, Tony, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. How you doing?
Doing just fine. So we got the Buckeyes taking on Purdue. And before we dig in on Ohio State and Purdue, we want to let you know that you catch Tony's work at theozone.net. And all you have to do is listen to the videos here, the analysis and the breakdowns that he gives us. Just expand that about 1,000 times, and that's what you get on the Ozone. It's exceptional coverage of Ohio State football. So for the average college football fan, Tony, it's, well, Ohio State's going to the playoff. They'll probably go undefeated. They passed the test at Penn State, number 2 in the country. They got all this 5-star talent. Dwayne Haskins is playing like a monster. He's so much better than JT Barrett. This is a machine. But if you watch the games, the running game against Indiana and Purdue, or in Minnesota, about 3 yards per carry. The defense, the entire season has been getting gashed, and now without its best player, and now the unthinkable is that the defensive front is wobbling a little bit with injuries included. So it's not necessarily a perfect football team.
No, it is definitely not a perfect football team. And like you said, when you lose Nick Bosa, arguably the best player in the country, that's going to have an impact on the front four, on the linebackers, and in the secondary. But for me, the most glaring issue is the lack of the running game. And they're making up for the yards through the passing game and the RPO stuff. But when they need a yard or two on 3rd down or 4th down, they haven't been able to get it of late as routinely and as automatically as they have in the past. So it's really, while you're seeing Dwayne Haskins throw for 400 yards and the offense, I think, is 2nd in the nation, averaging like 560 yards per game, you still have all of these questions of Urban Meyer each week, like what's wrong with this, what's wrong with that. And you're waiting for the lack of the running game to catch up with them, because we are heading to November. The weather is starting to turn here in the Midwest, and you can't just rely on the passing game. And so when you're not seeing the running game that you're used to seeing, it keeps, questions keep coming up as to why. And there are different reasons, but until you see them fixed, you're going to keep getting the questions.
Got Tony Gerdeman on the line from theozone.net. Join him there for Ohio State football coverage with the Buckeyes taking on Purdue. That game's an ABC game at 7:30 Eastern time, because it's not a loaded schedule of marquee matchups in college football, number 1. Number 2, Ohio State brings eyeballs to the TV set. So regardless of who they're playing, they're going to be a big draw. And number 3, it's got a bit of an Iowa feel to it, Tony. This Buckeyes team has not faced Purdue. The actual players on the field have not faced Purdue. They have not been to this stadium. It's a mid-tier, dangerous Big Ten team that may get really amped up for this game, and they're playing well with a 3-game winning streak, feeling good about themselves, having played even in their losses well against Missouri in particular, beating Boston College by 17 points and winning in the Big Ten the last few weeks.
Yeah, this is a Purdue team that you don't have to imagine too hard or pretend too hard that they could be 6-0 at this point and ranked in the top 15, because they have 3 losses by all of 8 points. So, it's a talented team with question marks, and, the teams they've beaten haven't been great, and the teams they've lost to haven't been great. But it's still, like you said, the Iowa thing. When you looked at the schedule, the Ohio State schedule at the beginning of the season, you look for that trap game. And last year, Iowa was seen as a trap game, but you never expected what happened there could possibly happen. And so now that we've seen that is possible, now you look on, every schedule from there on after, you're going to look and say, where is that Iowa game? And this is the Iowa game that people have pointed to for the Buckeyes this year. But the Buckeyes themselves have also heard about it, so I think they're more prepared for this. This is the biggest thing to hit Purdue since Joe Tiller, this game. And for Ohio State, it's just another big game. They've been to Penn State. They were in Dallas this year. They've been to big bowl games. They've, been to Michigan. So going to Purdue it's big. But it's just another big game for the guys in at Purdue. For the Boilermakers, this is the biggest thing they've played in. So you wonder, does it become too much for them, or are they, do they feed off of it, and does it drive them through the entire game? So that's one of the interesting aspects. I'm looking forward to seeing how both teams react to an environment that is new for one team and is customary for the road team.
And if I'm remembering the schedule correctly last year, and when we probably had the discussion that there were many Buckeyes who were extremely young and pressed into action, very talented players. But I think the trip to Nebraska was earlier in the season, right? Was before the Iowa game, if I remember.
I believe so. But you're asking the wrong guy, even though I cover the Buckeyes.
Yes, our minds all work different ways, but I believe the Nebraska trip was before, but the thought process was they're just so bad that they beat them like 56-14, and that the Iowa team was more capable, and it just they would take the crowd out of the game within the first 10 minutes against Nebraska anyway, and that of course didn't happen at Iowa, and it turned into just a lion's den. This Purdue stadium doesn't have the reputation of Kinnick Stadium by any stretch, but as you say, they're playing their biggest game potentially in years and years and years in terms of pulling off an upset. Is there talk from Urban Meyer and the coaches and the players concerning the run game and why that's not working?
Yeah, one of the interesting things, we talked to offensive line coach Greg Stedrawa this week, explaining the difficulties in run blocking for the RPOs that they've been doing this year. And then they did it last year as well with JT Barrett. After the Minnesota game, offensive coordinator Kevin Wilson said that the linemen aren't staying on their blocks long enough. Now with the RPO, if you stay on your blocks too long and it's a pass play, you're going to get flagged for being downfield, which happened once with Isaiah Prince this past week against Minnesota. So there is this feeling like the offensive line last year didn't have to worry about the pass because the RPO was essentially either a handoff or a JT Barrett run. So it was almost an RRPO, and there was very little pass in that run pass option last year. This year, it's a handoff or a pass, and the defense can take away that handoff if they want. So you've got this offensive line that is run blocking, but knows it's probably not, a run. So they're not necessarily holding blocks as long as they normally do. And they're still learning, I think, how to get around this and how to maintain this run blocking that they need. And Kevin Wilson has said it comes down to attitude. And Greg Stedrawa says, stay on your blocks. If you get flagged, you get flagged. That's part of the game when it's the RPO. But that's not all of it, because they don't do that every time. So there are other aspects as to why they aren't running the ball well. And yeah, there are loaded boxes at times, but it's not always. And yet you still have Ohio State throwing for, 370 yards per game. At some point, you think a defense would maybe worry a little bit more about the pass than they do the run, but we haven't really gotten to that point yet.
Got Tony Gerdeman on the line from the Ozone talking Ohio State football as the Buckeyes take on the Boilers in West Lafayette. Saturday night game, 7:30 Eastern Time, ABC. Let's stay with the offense because we talked about some issues. But let's talk about the good points on the offense, and obviously it's an explosive passing game. So the numbers are going to bear out that this may be the most prolific passing offense in the history of Ohio State football. I can't imagine that it won't be, because Dwayne Haskins has 28 touchdown passes, I think is the number. And so he's gonna throw for 45 touchdowns, 50 touchdowns. The competition's getting better. 45 touchdowns, whatever it is. On the other hand, let's just talk about efficiency and the ability of the players on the field. Is this the best? I threw out a couple hours ago on another discussion. I threw out Santonio Holmes and Ted Ginn and Troy Smith at the quarterback position, 05-06.
Yeah, when you think back on those days, it's hard to top when you had Ted Ginn, Santonio Holmes, Anthony Gonzalez, who was also a first rounder, and then the running backs that they had. But I think there's more depth now. But I think if you put those guys from 2005 and pulled them into, today's game, they'd light it up like these guys are. But there's 6 guys that they rely on, and they all rotate in. And then you've got KJ Hill and Paris Campbell as their slot receivers, who both rotate and play half the time. They're both on pace for 1,000 yards this year, 1,000 yards receiving, which would be the first time an Ohio State receiver had 1,000 yards receiving since 2002, with Michael Jenkins, the year the Buckeyes won a national title that year. So you've got those inside receivers, and you've got 4 outside receivers who each week it's somebody different, with 100 yards receiving and a touchdown or 2 touchdowns. And they're a very unselfish group. They all block for each other, which is another big thing. We talked to Brian Hartline, the new wide receivers coach, this week, and he talked about their blocking when, you're not just blocking for running backs, you're blocking for each other in that room, in the receivers room. So you have to look each other in the eye while you're watching either a missed block for your teammate next to you or a block that you made for them to spring them for a touchdown. So there's a lot of accountability with the receivers. And there's also, we're talking those top 6 guys are all juniors or 4th year or 5th year players. So it's a very veteran group, and they're going to lose probably 4 of them after this year. So Buckeye fans, enjoy them while they're here. And I guess you could say the same for Dwayne Haskins.
So it appears as though Harrison's back at linebacker for the Buckeyes this week. The defensive problems, where do you pin those? The linebacking core has probably been the one unit that hasn't been spectacular in recent years. But the defensive line, as we mentioned off the top, is not healthy.
Yeah, you've got last week they were without their 2 starting defensive ends. Nick Bosa's obviously gone. Jonathan Cooper was out with a concussion. He's back this week. But then your 2 starting defensive tackles, Robert Landers and Dre'Mont Jones, are both injured as well, but they're playing. And so when you're injured and you're playing up front and you're trying to stop the run, it doesn't go as well as it does when you're healthy. So, the Buckeyes will get through this game somehow, however they get through it. Then they have a bye week to get healthy. And they really need that up front. Now, the linebackers have been the issue all season long, along with the strong safety, which is the deep safety in the Ohio State defense has been the other issue. And you mentioned like the linebackers, they're not spectacular. And that's what we've come to expect at Ohio State, spectacular linebackers, all-American linebackers. And right now, if they could just get all Big Ten linebackers, I think people would be, flipping in joy. But right now you're getting just really average play. And each week, Urban Meyer, every position coach grades his players, and you either earn a champion's grade or you don't. And it was only, like maybe the 3rd or 4th week before a linebacker earned a champion's grade. So it tells you that they weren't playing that well, and rarely do all 3 starters earn. I don't think they've earned a champion's grade together this season. So yeah, when you ask anybody like what's wrong with the Ohio State defense, the first place they're going to start is that linebacker group and linebacker coach Bill Davis. But then it's a chicken and egg issue. Is it Greg Schiano's defense? Is it the players? And in reality, it's probably all of it, including an injured and banged up defensive line.
So we're being asked in the live chat about the Dre'Mont Jones injury. He injured his ankle, just to set that straight. All right, we got Tony Gerdeman on the line from the Ozone covering Ohio State football. Join him there. You get a snippet here, expanded 1,000 times, and it's really good stuff there at the Ozone as they break down each and every Ohio State positional unit, game previews, the whole deal across the board, plus podcasts on there as well. Tony, is the Ohio State community, based on what you see at the message boards and the people that come up to you, I'm sure every time you go in public and online and all over the place, are they noticing how well that team up north's playing?
There is some noticing of it, although with that win over Wisconsin, you'll also have people reminding other people about the 17-0 deficit against Northwestern. Yeah, sure, they looked great against Wisconsin, but then they also will tell you that Wisconsin's not very good. And then also, don't forget about that Northwestern game. And there's truth to some of that, And I don't think Wisconsin was a very good matchup for Michigan because, they walked right into Don Brown's wheelhouse, basically, with what they do and what their quarterback cannot do. But you can't deny the way the Michigan offense is coming together now, especially Shea Patterson, and the way, I talked about this on my podcast this past week, the way Ed Warner's offensive lines at Ohio State, even if they started slow, you knew that they were going to get better as the season went on, and it was reliable. You didn't have to worry about it. It just always happened. Everything fell into place. And now that he's at Michigan, you're starting to see some of that as well, where, early in the season, they couldn't pass block. This guy looked terrible. That guy looked terrible. There's nobody to replace the bad starters. And now you get into the middle of October and those bad starters aren't so bad anymore. And you'll get to November and they're even better. And that's just what he does. He's arguably the best in the nation at what he does as an offensive line coach. And, we're seeing the exact opposite going on at Ohio State right now. But you have to respect and pay attention to what Michigan's doing, at least at home. On the road, who knows? At Notre Dame, they lost 24-17. At Northwestern, they won 20-17, had to score 20 straight points. They go to Michigan State this week, noon game, which is terrible timing because I'll be in the car driving to West Lafayette and, I'll miss it. But I want to see a whole Michigan team on the road. Let's see. I'm tired of these two Michigan teams. I want to see just a complete Michigan Wolverine team. Doesn't matter what venue, doesn't matter on the road or whatever. Let's see them be complete and finally get that big road win that they've missed for so long.
Tony, jumping all over the place, but getting back to Haskins, and everybody's so giddy about how well he's playing, and rightfully so. He's remarkable. It's fun to watch a guy that can operate from the pocket because there's so few of those in college football that almost, not that his level of thinking and breakdown of the defense, but in terms of delivering the ball, it looks like an NFL game. Like it looks like an NFL play. You're watching, and again, I'm not elevating the intellect of breaking down the defense and making the right read, but once he lets it go, it's like watching Brady or someone of that ilk that can make every throw, and it looks great. But at the same time, you mentioned the weather issue concerning the running game. JT Barrett gained a lot of yards and was a threat to that defense because he didn't have blazing speed, but he had better than average quarterback speed by far. And he knew when to run, when not to run from the pocket. And of course, a lot of those were design plays. And he knew how to read blocks and where to go. And that whole piece is missing.
Yeah, it's completely gone. And the thing about it is if you go through Urban Meyer's time at Ohio State from 2012 to now, every year about this time, the quarterback passing production begins to plummet. With Braxton Miller in 2012 and 13, and JT Barrett the last 4 years, whether it's the weather or the opponents get tougher, both, the passing game just continues to drop and drop and drop. And that's why, you're seeing him set all of these, or these projections right now. And you were right to dial the touchdowns back. We're not looking at 56 touchdowns or whatever. It's going to be maybe in the 40s just because that's what we've grown accustomed to. But also, they've never had a quarterback like Dwayne Haskins who can throw the ball like this. And, they have had one game in really bad rain, and I think he was 21 of 24. So the little bit of bad weather he's been in, it didn't affect them at all. And you've seen the last couple of weeks, it's weather's been fine, but he's completing 75% of his passes while, with 44 attempts. And I think we're all, every single step of the way, we're like, well, yeah, Dwayne Haskins looked good against Michigan, but let's see how he does against TCU. Well, yeah, okay, he was okay against TCU, got a little bit of pressure, but let's see how he does at Penn State. All right, he got the win there. Wasn't his best game, but he was still Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week. Now let's see what happens when we get to bad weather, and how does he perform there? And, the receivers that he has, they've stepped up for him. He's thrown 4 interceptions on the season. One was hit his tight end in the hands. The other 3 he's hit while he's throwing. So, that gives you a pretty good idea of when he throws the ball, it gets to where, usually gets to where it's supposed to go. He's completing like around 73% of his passes. Last week, he was 33 of 44, and I think there were 6 pass breakups to let you know. So that shows you like maybe 4 or 5 passes weren't, catchable, and there were some throwaways in there. So, like you said, when he sets his sight on a receiver, the ball usually ends up really, really close. And the ball placement this year from him is better than any quarterback at Ohio State I've ever seen.
Yeah, early to mid-November. I don't know exactly the date in East Lansing. Just reeks of dark and dank and a little dreary and rainy and a little blustery and not the best passing conditions.
Yeah, and even Saturday night, it's going to be in the 40s and 20-mile-an-hour gusts, and it'll be rainy earlier in the day. And who knows if that rain will continue. And, that's when we go back to that running game. You've got to find some way to move the ball. And, they're pretty confident that they can throw it. And, but how many passing teams have you seen win national titles over the years? It's name one.
Yeah, I'm still. I've come up with a couple balanced teams, like a Jameis Winston Florida State team, but they still ran the ball very effectively with a few backs. Devonta Freeman being pretty good, in particular. Yeah. So yeah, Buckeye fans are going to be checking the weather forecast more readily coming up on game days, and particular games don't necessarily stand out in my mind in terms of rain or snow or sleet. In terms of a series, except for the Michigan game, I can pretty much think, okay, what was the weather like? And last week in November, it's expected not to be good, but there have been certainly Ohio State Michigan games where it was pushing 60 degrees. So it could be anywhere by late November in Columbus.
And the thing about that game, though, is if you go back, I don't know, 30 or 40 years, maybe once or twice in that series has the team who rushed for fewer yards won. And right now, when you look at the way both teams are trending, that running game is trending towards Michigan, even though the game is in Ohio Stadium. And the other thing, even when Michigan's offense and their running game has struggled in past seasons, they've found ways to move the ball against Ohio State. And now if they're, playing very well and you've got Shea Patterson as a runner as well, that plays into a pretty formidable running game against an Ohio State defense that struggles in the first half against everybody and doesn't run it that well themselves. So maybe this will be one of those rare years if Ohio State pulls it out where the team who runs for fewer yards gets the win, but that's not something you bet on.
Tony Gerdeman breaking down Ohio State and Purdue. Please join him at theozone.net. Tony, appreciate it. We know that you've got a lot of stuff going on and trying to fill up the website with a lot of great material and get headed out in the morning, to West Lafayette. So I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. I'm going to say goodbye as well. We'll be back at 4 o'clock Eastern time, so in about a half hour with a wholesome one to talk Miami football, and we're going to engulf you with Miami football talk at 6 o'clock with Alonso 1219, the U family. Is there anybody on here that wants to give me a phone call? 860-325-3687. I'll take a phone call before we hit the road. And actually, besides my banana about 6 hours ago with a few almonds, get something to eat before 4 o'clock, which is about a half hour away. So we appreciate it. The support is always appreciated and welcomed. The Amazon links are down in the description section. If you enter the website, you will support Mark Rogers TV. Likes, comments, and subscribers is what we're looking for as well. So we know that you guys have already done your due diligence. But as George often says, and I don't know if he's in the live chat right now, and a few other people have mentioned, let's get the likes up. Whatever the analytics are at YouTube, whatever they do with that certainly pushes the videos to the suggested videos for those folks that are watching college football content. So we appreciate your help. We'll be back at 4 o'clock Eastern time with a wholesome one to talk Miami. 6 o'clock again. Maybe I go to the store between that. I got to get some groceries, or maybe I go get a workout in, or maybe I produce more Mark Rogers TV college football content because I had promised 28-80-20 conference rankings. Conference rankings, and I've got to do my predictions for tonight as well. I'm at about 58% against the spread. And most importantly, if you like to play a buck or two on the line for week 8, I've done extremely well finding upsets. So last week it was Oregon getting 3.5 against Washington. I picked the Ducks to win outright. And what was the other game? LSU. I took the 7 points, but I not only took the 7, I said LSU was going to win at Georgia. Took that one. The other game that I missed, I didn't entirely miss it against the spread because South Carolina was getting 3 against Texas A&M, and they lost by 3. So we were safe on that one. All right, everyone. We appreciate it. 16 likes, and this thing's going to have, we got 22 watching right now. So we are going to have, as soon as I shut this down, it'll have 150 to 200 views, probably more than that, since this has been up and running for an hour and a half. This is going to have 200 views right out of the gate and only 16 likes. Who mentioned that to me? Navy Thomas 8 and NCIS Fanatic 21. Yeah, it's disappointing. So it just takes a click. So again, you don't have to like me personally. You don't have to agree with me. But if you enjoy the content, the discussion, the debate, the analysis that we provide here at Mark Rogers TV, just like. And of course, comments. We've got the live chat room fired up here. And we also, in addition to that, once it posts, then comment to the video right there as well. 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, Miami Talk. We'll be back in a half hour right here at Mark Rogers TV.